Good evening and welcome to the regular council meeting of the Region of Queens Municipality. It is Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024, and it is 6 p.m. I would like to call the meeting to order. There are a few points to add to the agenda. Under 6.0, please add 6.1, the minutes. They were not attached on the agenda, but they are now on your desk. So that's the minutes for April 9th. Under personnel in camera, one item 9.1 personnel. And are there any other? Oh yes, and one item under discussion, which becomes 8.6, and we'll call that memorial bench and tree request. Under discussion 8.6, and that paperwork is on your desk. Are there any other additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll ask for approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Charlton, seconded by Councillor Gidney. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. There are no presentations this evening. Do any councillors have any petitions to present? No petitions. 5.0 public question comment session. This is an opportunity for anyone visiting us to speak to council. You need to provide your name and the community in which you live, and we allow a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone here today who wishes to speak to council? Seeing none, I will ask for approval of the minutes of April 9th, 2024. Moved by Councillor Gidney, seconded by Councillor Hawks. Are there any questions? All those in favor? Unanimous. Recommendations 7.1. There are two recommendations. If someone would so make the first. It's moved by Councillor Brown.
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receives the report titled Special Council Meeting 2024-2025 Budget for information.
And seconded by Councillor Amaro. Are there any questions on the report that basically is just proposing a special council meeting on April 29th at 9 a.m.? We'll just do the first one because we've been in the tradition of accepting the report first. So any questions respecting the report, which is proposing a special council meeting on April 29th? If not, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Unanimous. And then there is a second recommendation under that item. Councillor Brown.
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality hold a special council meeting on April 29th, 2024 at 9 a.m. in the council chambers to review the final draft operating capital and 3-year water utility budgets.
Seconded by Councillor Charlton. Are there any questions respecting that? All council was made aware that there was going to be a special council meeting on that date. If not, I'll ask for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Unanimous. 7.2, it has been a request from the poll committee, and there is a recommendation there. Councillor Deputy Mayor Fancy.
I so recommend that the Council of the Region of Queens Municipality appoint Dr. Celeste Johnson to the poll committee.
And the seconder is Councillor Amaro. Perhaps the poll committee could just give us a bit of background on why the additional need for another member.
Well, with the poll as we're raising monies for the pool, Mrs. Johnson will be the one who will be leading up the trying to get the funds is going forward in the outside community. So in order to do that, she has to be part of the committee to be able to go forward for us.
Are there any questions respecting this motion? If not, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Unanimous. Which takes us to discussions. 8.1, speed limit reductions in Liverpool. Director Grant will come to the speaker table for any questions. This is a discussion item, but there is a motion respecting the report. Councillor Gidney.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receive the report titled Speed Limit Reduction for information.
And that is seconded by Councillor Brown. As there are questions respecting the report, perhaps we'll have that time now because this is a report. So are there questions respecting the report that Director Grant may offer? Because I believe there had been some questions. Are there any questions respecting the report? No questions respecting the report? Councillor Charlton.
I was just wondering if there would be sort of like before my questions, I don't mind asking them first, but if there would be any kind of like high level just discussion for those who aren't aware what prompted this, because this was back in November with the petition. Like, I can certainly make a comment if you wanted me to, or if you would like Director Grant to.
Well, basically, this is a response to a request in a petition that was supplied by residents in Council Gidney's area. And yes, that is Fort Point is your area. Yes. So it was a request from there, and it was later expanded to be a request to look at speed reduction limits on the municipal streets in Liverpool. So perhaps Director Grant, if you could just give us your overview of the contents in the report. I think there were questions about the 85th percentile being at 45 kilometers, what's required in order to reduce speeds within Liverpool. I think it's very important for councillors to note that the ability of the municipality has to request speed reductions basically are on streets that are already being driven at or below the speed limit. So, Director Grant.
Sure. So back in January, Council directed staff to provide a list of roads that meet the criteria eligible for speed reductions. So I spoke with the Provincial Traffic Authority. They have jurisdiction over the streets that we control under ours as far as speed reduction. They provided the 5 criteria there that they would consider under their policy for speed reduction. And basically what the criteria do is evaluate the constraints of the street, if it's local or commercial, if it's residential or not, what other factors come into play. And the 85th percentile is a question I guess I was asked a few times last week. That's quite a common term in the traffic engineering world. So it represents what the vast majority of motorists are doing, how they're interpreting the conditions of the road, and how they're utilizing their vehicle to travel on those. Excuse me. So we took that criteria, applied it to the streets in Liverpool that are under our jurisdiction, shortened them up to, I think it's 42 sections. That was as far as we could get, 42 sections or segments of street that we could evaluate on the knowledge that we have right now. From there, we need further study done by a qualified traffic engineer, which is what we're providing for your consideration.
Are there any other questions than on the report? Councillor Gidney.
So my understanding is that you can't make that decision to reduce it. You have to have this has to be reviewed by a third party.
That's correct. So it has to be reviewed by the Provincial Traffic Authority. We would make a submission, or I would as the Municipal Traffic Authority, to them for their consideration. The information that they need, we're not able to develop in-house right now. We need an external consultant to do some further study and analysis.
Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. So to clarify, based off the information here for Main Street, east of School Street, that's the only one that currently would qualify potentially for that reduction, although it's up to the Provincial Traffic Authority. But are you saying that the information we have here doesn't actually allow us to put that application into the Provincial Traffic Authority as it stands now?
So the information we have now would bring us to the fifth step, which would be an application of the guidelines for establishing posted speed limit. And what that does is take the design of the street and make a determination of what the speed limit should be. Mm-hmm. So we'll recognize whether the street's too wide for the use of it, or if there's cyclists, or if there's parking on street, that kind of stuff. And then from there, once we have that criteria established, we can submit to the Provincial Traffic Authority for their evaluation.
Now, are you saying for that criteria we require an external person to do that?
That is correct.
Okay.
So I noticed, Director Grant, that the cost to evaluate all the streets, which would meet most of the eligibility, would be an additional $21,000, and it was $1,000 to assess the section of road, Main Street, east of School Street. Would there be $1,000 within your budget somewhere to have that money done, or would that require an extra $1,000 in the budget to evaluate that one small section of street?
So in the proposed budget right now, we have not included any money for further traffic studies. One street we can probably, identify within the budget some room to make that work. But if we go beyond that, it's definitely not within our purview right now.
So that's good to know. So we could look at the lower end of Main from School Street to Riverside with money that's existing in the budget. But any further streets would require additional funds. Councillor Brown, did you have a question? That was my question. Okay. Any other questions on the report before we accept the report? So it has been moved and seconded. And call for the question. All those in favor of the report and the information presented? Contrary? Okay. There is a second motion. If anyone wishes to meet it, it requires future deliberation. Anyone wish to make that motion? So I believe in answer to that, then there will not be any consideration of funding future traffic studies to the amount of $21,000 from accumulated surplus. So we are fine with that point. But we also understand that council can so choose to have further examination that you can find within your already proposed budget of $1,000 from School Street to Riverside. Councillor Charlton?
So can I just clarify, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page here, that by only moving that first motion, it was just stated that they have room to deal with the $1,000 independent assessment, so that will absolutely move forward. What we're saying is we're not doing other studies and looking at other roads?
I believe what Councillor Grant answer to my question is there would be room if council directed that, but there has been no direction from council yet to further do that.
So I'm not a fan of the $21,000 study at this time. Looking at all of those other roads, I think we should deal with the petition that was filed, and this one happens to meet that criteria. So then we don't have written motions here. We don't have other options. So understanding that, am I able to put forward a motion that at the next meeting? Okay, so do I need to give that intent here today? No? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Couldn't we add read the motion that's listed here and then ask for a change to that motion to reflect just the one item, one road, and that way it would get done on this meeting and move it forward in time for the budget?
There is a motion there. It would require some changes.
Yeah.
So it would, someone could read it to read that the Council of the Region of Queens Municipality consider at their May 14th, 24 meeting a motion to direct staff to conduct Section 5, or we'll just say traffic study, to conduct traffic study on the municipal road segment, School Street, Main Street east of School Street, as outlined, and fund the $1,000 cost from the proposed budget. From the proposed draft 24-25 budget. As Councillor Grant did say, he had room within his budget to do that. So if someone would like to repeat that motion?
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality consider at their May 14th, 2024 meeting a motion to direct staff to conduct traffic study on the municipal road segment from Main Street east of, on Main Street east of School Street to Riverside Drive, and that the amounts be paid from their budget, their proposed budget. Okay, thank you.
And that's seconded by Councillor Charlton. And that will be done sometime within the 24-25 year time frame. Are there any questions? If not, I'll call for the motion. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. Next item deals with 8.2 Crosswalk Safety Society engagement. There is one recommendation. Councillor Romero?
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receive the report titled Crosswalk Safety Society Engagement for Information.
And that's seconded by Councillor Gidney. Perhaps Director Grant, again, this Crosswalk Safety Society engagement resulted from our January 13th regular meeting where you were directed, or staff were directed, to explore a partnership with Crosswalk Safety Society respecting buckets and flags at the three-way intersection. Can you just give us some quick overview of what's in here respecting where most municipalities use those flags and other things?
Sure. So back probably in March, I guess it was, I met with Norm Collins, the president and treasurer, volunteer leader of the Crosswalk Safety Society in Nova Scotia. We had quite a long conversation, went back and forth by email for probably a few weeks, just chatting. Then we decided to pick up the phone and have a good long talk. So we talked probably an hour and a half, trying to establish, I guess, some observations we've all made about crosswalks, how people utilize them, how motorists utilize them, what some of the problems are, how their flag program started, how successful it is, where they're using it at, where they're seeing success and not seeing success. And then just come back, share some information about the cost of them, how they deploy them, how it's typically approached with community groups, generally taking the lead. Some jurisdictions do install them and maintain them, but typically what they're seeing is school groups or community groups coming together and signing up and taking the lead role on them. One of the points he did make was that though they haven't seen a real defined success with them, they do believe that they are an improvement to any crosswalk and just something that any pedestrian can use should they wish voluntarily.
Other questions to Director Grant? Councillor Gidney.
Thank you. I'm wondering, like, you said that like a third party would do the flags. Is there a reason that we couldn't do the flags as a region?
So every jurisdiction's had a different take or a different approach to it. Some of them have definitely implemented themselves as far as the jurisdiction goes. My conversation with other traffic engineers in the Provincial Traffic Authority, where they're not adopted under our guidelines that we use for assessing traffic matters, they wouldn't be suggested to implement them under our hat as the Traffic Authority. That being said, Halifax does allow them, their municipal engineer does, their traffic engineer, but the community group is still responsible for them to kind of separate the liability in the installation and put responsibility somewhere else, as opposed to falsely creating a sense of security that may not exist, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
I think it should also be noted in the report, and Director Grant failed to note this, that while we hear that there's, a huge issue at those crosswalks, one of the things that came to light during this conversation was because of all the recent quick interaction with social media and online events, many incidents and little misses and all those things that probably have been happening over the years are suddenly on top, and they're reported instantly. And I think it's also important to note that additional research that he did indicates that the installation of flags at stop-controlled intersections, which is that intersection, it's an intersection and every lane has stop signs, such as Main and Market, has not been shown to demonstrate improvement in pedestrian safety, as motorists are already required to stop. Most of these flags that people are used on pieces of highway that aren't stops. It would be, for example, at this crosswalk out here, where there's not a stop. But I think that was a really important thing to note, that there's no evidence that they demonstrate at stop-controlled intersections that they are beneficial. Just wanted to make sure that everyone read that point. So, Deputy Mayor Fancy.
Okay, if we pass this recommendation that's on the floor, up above we have another recommendation that could have come through, saying that we would fund a flag program, right? So if we pass this, then we don't do the flag program. Is that what? Just wanted to know. That's what we're saying.
Deputy Mayor Fancy, just for clarification, our reports and all of our discussion items have first been coming with a report. So what we're doing at this point in time is simply discussing the report. It has nothing to do with a second motion respecting funding the flag program. This is discussion around the report. So we're simply discussing the report. Where we've made this is not a deliberation at this point in time of whether or not we'll be installing them. We're just discussing the report in case anyone had any questions about the contents of the report. Because the motion that's on the floor is that we receive the report. So I just felt, because this was a technical report, that rather than we all vote that we've received it, we all have time to discuss it, to acknowledge that we understand it. And then once we have all of our questions about the report answered, then if someone wishes to make the motion to fund it, then that is a separate motion in itself. But at this point in time, we're discussing the report as that is the motion on the floor, that we receive the report. And as chair, I want to ensure that as councillors, you all are aware of what's in the report because you're voting that you've received it and you understand its contents. Did that answer your question?
Somewhat. Just that I don't know why there's a recommendation up above beforehand. It kind of confuses. It's just kind of confusing to me. So I didn't know. I thought, well, if we take the recommendation down below, then we say we don't want the flags. That's what I get from that. Maybe I'm reading it wrongly. That's.
Councillor Muse?
I feel that the motion up above is part of the report. So it doesn't say that this isn't part of the report. So I think that it is part of the report and that we can discuss that. Myself, I think that we should be doing the flags. It's not a lot of money. I've been going through that intersection a lot lately. And when you come up Market Street and go to the right, you have a hard job to see people walking there. I know it's not going to stop every accident, but if we can stop one with a flag that's going to cost us $1,400, I think it's worth it.
So we're back to the question on the floor, which is the question receiving the report. And yes, Director Grant, when he wrote the report, he did have included in the report, he does state it's not the recommendation of staff. However, if council wishes to proceed, the second motion could read. So at this point in time, we are discussing the first motion, which is receiving the report. And I sense there are no more questions about the report and people want to move on to the second question. Therefore, I'm going to call for question on the first motion, was that we received the report and all the information that it contains. All those in favor? Thank you. Unanimous. There is a second motion if someone so wishes to make that motion. Councillor Muse.
I move that the Council of the Region of Queens fund a pedestrian flag program for the main and market intersection from accumulated surplus.
And that is seconded by Deputy Mayor Fancy. Discussion. Councillor Charlton.
Thank you. I can see both sides. We were in Dartmouth last weekend for some basketball, and these flags are very popular in HRM. They're everywhere. What I did notice is that they were at all crosswalks unless they were traffic controlled with traffic lights. So there was a minimum of those, but there weren't any spots unique like ours with our three-way stop. Any stops that I came across that were three-ways had lights because of the population with the traffic. So I can see why that has been noted, that they don't possibly believe it would do anything. Also respecting that members in our community really feel unsafe in that three-way intersection with the crosswalk. And if we have the ability to give them something that is bright and orange, that may help. Maybe we could just look at this as a pilot project. Could this do anything? I personally feel more so that lights that pedestrians could hit before they cross would have more effect, which we will get to, I guess, in the next report. But I wouldn't be opposed to potentially a pilot project to look at if this was an option. But I think lights perhaps would have more benefit. The crosswalk lights, to clarify.
Other comments? Councillor Romero?
I agree with Councillor Charlton as well. I think there is pros and cons, but we did also receive a report from our local RCMP, Andrew Windsor, about the benefits of the flags, even for short term or right away. Anything would help at this point before we establish what we're going to do in a long term.
Other comments, Councillor Gidney?
I have mixed emotions. I agree with the flags. I think that would be a very good idea. However, I'm really concerned that says the intersection of Main and Market would not meet the HRM criteria for installation because it's a stop-controlled intersection with an official traffic signs in place. So I don't understand what that means. If we put the flags in, what happens? So who? I'm a little confused on this part. Thank you.
Yeah, so based on HRM's approach, they consider stop signs to be the ultimate control because motorists are forced to come to a complete stop at them. At that point, they're required to check for pedestrians or obstructions in any direction before proceeding. Suggesting that a pedestrian with a flag is in a more safe condition is not necessarily accurate because the motorist has already stopped. So in the same kind of logic sense, I guess if the motorists aren't stopping, the flag isn't going to help them anyway. So it's kind of a catch-22 perhaps. And I think that's why they've taken that approach.
So what happens if we do say, okay, we're going to put the flags here? So then what happens then? How do we work this out?
If you're asking if council wishes to install the flags, I think similar to Halifax, we need to develop an administrative policy on how we deal with requests because once we have one door open, I think more will open after that. I don't feel comfortable consenting to the installation, quite frankly, as the traffic authority. So I think that's something that we'll have to talk about internally and try and evaluate ourselves.
Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Yes. I think we're all saying the same thing. Is we're looking here and we're seeing that yes, the stop sign is the ultimate because if you see a stop sign, you stop. But two things I want to bring in is that when you have road maintenance and you see people holding a stop sign for you to stop, do they stand there and hold the stop sign and stop? No, they move it back and forth because they want to make sure you see it. Because sometimes you can be looking right at something and miss it. And so moving that sign back and forth catches your attention. The same type of thing with the flags. The flag moving back and forth for somebody walking is going to get more in your attention than it will be just a red stop sign sitting there. The other part is to do nothing is to do nothing. Due diligence says that we need to do something to go forward to show forth we're at least trying to do something. I know is this the end all be all? No, it's not. But is it if it can help? If it can just catch the eye of somebody that movement of the flag, I'm for at least trying to do it. As Councillor Charlton said, it's not something I think we've been put in forever, but I think we can at least try, and I think we're doing our due diligence to go forward that way.
Councillor, before I recognize Councillor Gidney, does any other councillor wish to speak before Councillor Gidney speaks again? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I guess my question for Director Grant was more back. What did you mean by the liability? What liability would we be assuming by putting flags like these at an intersection that doesn't meet the criteria for installation?
I think anytime we introduce anything to a situation which doesn't have a clear and direct guideline with substantiated evidence, determined by professionals, we're introducing liability. For me to suggest putting these in place will improve safety when I don't know in fact it will would be contradictory to my intent. So I guess that's kind of my position on the matter.
Councillor Gidney?
Thank you. I'm still confused. So if we want to put flags there, do we have to make a bylaw or resolution or something so that would allow us to do this?
It would be my opinion that we would need to have some type of guidelines. Otherwise, as Director Grant implied, We have crosswalks all over the streets that we own in Liverpool. And if I were a mother living on one of those streets, and I would ask my counselor why we don't have one there as well. I'll express my opinions regarding the whole flag matter at the end, because then I have to turn my chair over. So I will continue to hear other viewpoints. Councillor Charlton.
Thank you. I'm wondering, since there's a motion here that says we can obviously move forward and fund a pedestrian flag program, I would say that the report is incomplete in ways that it doesn't say how we get there. So if the majority of council were to support this motion, we don't have the administrative policies. We don't, like the liability part. If we're uncertain about our liability, how do we pass that on to a community group? So respectfully, I don't think that we can pass that motion here today without all of those other facts, because I think we need to have those facts to be able to make that decision. And so I think this report perhaps needs a few additional things so that council understands what exactly is on the line here before we say yes, put the flags there, or no.
And before CAO Jodry, that's why when we did the motion for the report, we provided all that time, because we've accepted the report as it is, but we've now noticed some inconsistencies in it. But to CAO Jodry?
As the person ultimately responsible to implement your motions, I feel that the motion so just for clarity, I put that motion in there in Director Grant's report. I feel that motion is sufficient for me to understand the will of council and the direction of council to proceed with it. Obviously, there's work that we would need to do to get that in place, but I would understand what council's intent was, and we would move in that direction. And if I ran into any issues or concerns, I bring those back to council.
To CAO Jodry, this report talks of $1,000, $1,050 price tag. If we are going to not find a community group to run the flag program, if we are going to have to run the flag program, if council chooses ourselves, then I believe that's a factor we need to figure in costs. If we are going to develop a policy, then we always factor prices on those things. So the $1,000 price tag suddenly becomes a little artificial, because that's simply the money for the buckets and the flags.
If I may, I'm not concerned about the cost of this at this intersection conflating. I believe that there are community members out there that would, have noted the concerns and would run with this. And obviously we would have a standard operating procedure about how to handle these matters for sure. But again, I'm not worried about the cost inflating or about our ability as a municipality to implement council's direction on this. And I would note that at the beginning of the MGA, it's very clear that council's area of responsibility is to consider, amongst other things, the matter of safety in the municipality. I think this falls within that purview. I think that there's some ambiguousness about the Motor Vehicle Act and this, but when it comes to this, I understand what council's intent is, and I feel capable of implementing it if council so votes accordingly.
Councillor Charlton.
Thank you. I do understand those points. I guess the difficulty with me lies as Director Grant is our traffic authority, and he's saying he doesn't have the evidence or the facts to say that this would improve safety, and he's having a hard time with the idea of approving this and putting these on the posts at the three-way intersection. So how do we as a council move that motion forward without all of those facts? I guess that's the struggle for me.
Just, if I could, you will notice that HRM Traffic Authority does not approve the installation of the flags either. They allow them, but they do not approve of them. I'm not sure the reason, but they do not approve of the installation of flags at crosswalks. So we would be no different than HRM. Their traffic authority does not approve of them either, for whatever reason we do not know. But they can allow them. It's just their name is not, they have not approved them.
So a traffic authority is setting rules, and then we can be held accountable for those rules and programs and things that we implement. For example, I think that's why HRM takes the approach that they do, which is to say that we will make the flags available. And then, as Director Grant mentioned about the liability, the idea of a community group then taking those flags and putting them in place probably is what navigates around that issue. And so as a traffic authority, I don't think council can direct the traffic authority to do this, but we're not needing to do that. We're just funding the program at this intersection, which is consistent with what HRM does. The only difference, and to everyone's point before, is the reason we haven't recommended this is because it doesn't meet all the criteria to show that, that it's going to make an impact. As Director Grant pointed out, there's already stop signs and, that sort of thing. But if this is what council wants, I'm not concerned about our ability to implement it. And I don't think it is necessarily something we have to worry about from a traffic authority. You're not directing the traffic authority to do this.
Are there any other comments? Councillor Charlton?
Just to follow up, on that point, about the liability part and the funding, it was my understanding that HRM allows them, but they don't fund them. And if we're funding them, then aren't we liable if we are funding them? I think if we can't get that clarification here, maybe we can, but I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be useful, instead of like getting in the weeds and just kind of going back and forth here, if we could get some clarification and hash out this motion at the next meeting so that we have that clarification, because I don't think it's necessarily fair to expect to get all that tonight, but
Awkward at the next meeting at which we want to adopt a budget, because then we change all the numbers on the spot, but it's a doable. Director Grant, you wish to state something?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So when I introduced the term liability, I wasn't necessarily speaking to like third-party public liability. As a traffic authority, I'm obligated to abide by a certain set of rules, which is basically yes and no's and not the gray areas between. So it's not under my discretion to pick and choose which tools we use. They're set out for me in guidelines and standards. And that's, I guess, the liability beyond my part to introduce a new concept or a new idea, suggesting that's going to improve safety when I don't know, in fact, it is. I'm not suggesting that there's liability on the community groups that install them or on the pedestrians that use them or any of that stuff. It's just more about an operational liability for me. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? If not, Deputy Mayor Fancy, would you just take the chair so I can make my comments? I am not going to recommend and vote in favor of this motion. It has nothing to do with the $1,050. I think it's a false sense of safety for the people using it. And ever since I've read this report, for some reason, I envision a child halfway across that crosswalk who suddenly realizes they didn't grab their flag and tearing back to get a flag. It is a crosswalk. It has stop signs. I do not believe it is going to make people stop their rolling stops. And I hate giving people a false sense of safety by providing flags. It's nothing to do with $1,050. If it cost $1,050, I'd fund it myself. But I don't believe, I just think it creates a false sense of safety at a crosswalk that already has stop signs. If we were talking about a crosswalk in a very busy at a very busy street that did not have stop signs, a busy street with lots of pedestrians crossing it, I can understand the need for flags, but there already are stop signs there. Anyway, that's just my point.
Councillor Gidney.
Thank you. I just want I've been reviewing this, and there's a lot of things that I agree and disagree with everyone talking. The point that I really hit home for me was they also acknowledge that while flags have reduced incidents, they have not been successful in eliminating them. However, it's an additional tool to enhance their visibility. So, like, we're never going to be able to eliminate, but if that tool is available that you can actually see them because they have the flag, then I think that's a good thing. But then on the other side, I'm not sure how we can implement that so that there's contradicting things going on here because of the stop signs, you get the flags. That it's in my world, this is a very gray area. I support the flags, but I don't know how we're going to do it, and that's my stop point, I guess. Thank you.
Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. Question to Director Grant. In speaking with Norm Collins, was this intersection, like pictures of this intersection, shared with him or any other, I guess, parties to see if this would, like, did he believe that this did not have a benefit, like his program? I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification there, if you could.
No, I didn't share any photos with him. We did chat about the intersection and discussion. Obviously, being a three-way stop, he's very passionate about his program. He takes a lot of it personally, and he would advocate for an installation at every crosswalk, point blank, no questions asked. He was quite satisfied with having them installed in HRM and other jurisdictions mid-block, and with the idea that someday they'll be out in every crosswalk. But we didn't discuss specifically just crosswalks in Liverpool in our chat. No. Correct.
Any other comments on this matter? Councillor Muse?
One thing about this intersection, there's so much going on in that intersection. And you're looking everywhere is trying to find it. Somebody is going across. I think that if they had a flag in their hand, you'd probably see them easier. Not saying it's going to stop every accident, and like I said, there's going to be people that won't use the flags. But like I said, the intersection is one of the hardest ones to come to, because you're looking around, seeing if there's traffic coming this way and that way, people walking across. With the flags, I think it would help some.
Councillor Charlton?
For me, I still would go back to my point about potentially tabling this motion because we still don't have those facts. Like if we make this motion tonight and move forward with these flags and there are risks that we're not made aware of in this or something that needs to be identified, I worry about the implications of that. Mayor Norman made a comment earlier that made me think, okay, well, what about some of these facts? So I support the flags, but I'm not comfortable just voting on this motion without a few more clarification points. And so for me, I'm not there, and I would move to table this motion until the next meeting.
Since we still have the motion on the floor, I'll go back to CAO Joe. Do you see, pardon me? You have to deal with that? Still? Okay. Okay, seconder for that. Okay. Yeah. All in favor on tabling that motion? So carried.
Thank you. 8.4, petitions response. No, 8.3. 8.3, Main and Market Street intersection review. Same area. Councillor Gidney.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receive the report titled Market and Main Street Intersection Review for information.
Seconded by Councillor Brown. So we'll do the same thing again. A very good explanation of what's been happening at that intersection and when the last review was. So, Director Grant, perhaps again, you can just give us a bit of history from the time of the last traffic study in 2015, the three things that were identified, the three things that were done, whether or not there's been any changes, and basically what the findings from your department were.
Sure. We were tasked with reviewing the previous report, which was about 9-10 years ago. That report identified 3 recommendations at the time, which was moving the crosswalk, which used to be more near Jubilee Street, getting it in the intersection where it belongs, as well as looking what was there for sidewalk furniture and rearranging some of that, whether it was benches or the waste receptacles. And then the overhead signage was the last one that was done in 2020. All those recommendations were completed within the last 10 years, obviously, as the report says. So from there, we looked at the data inside the report. At that time, it identified a lot of rolling stops, relatively low collision rate, as well as a good flow of traffic through that intersection. We did some traffic counts, just high level, spent a few hours here and there just to get an idea, and couldn't identify any substantial change. So from our kind of engineer perspective, it looks like the same conditions are apparent or evident now that were there 10 years ago. And we also spoke with the RCMP, looked at some collision data. The same kind of frequency rate was occurring over the last 10 years as what was occurring in the 5 years previous to the report. So we weren't able to identify any substantial change that occurred in the last 10 years, in the last year or two, that would support additional study or analysis.
Before I ask the questions of council in the report, I just have one question because I've always wondered. Did the report identify why the need for the crosswalk as you're coming down in front of the art gallery and going across on the first corner on Main Street? Is there a need for 3 sidewalks, for 3 crosswalks on that corner? Because I think when listen to Councillor Muse, 3 crosswalks are a head turner. And I often wonder, and I see that one crosswalk is rarely used. And has there ever been a look at eliminating a crosswalk and only having the 2, like one across from the post office and then the other one, and get rid of that 3rd?
So to answer the question directly, no, not to my knowledge. Nobody's ever looked at removing one. So crosswalks in general exist at every leg of an intersection, whether they're painted or signed or have any other kind of treatment applied to them to promote their visibility. So if we took up the paint, the crosswalk would still be there, whether it's marked or not under the Motor Vehicle Act. The only way would be to install some sort of prevention, perhaps guardrails, something like that, to stop pedestrians from crossing the street. If that was kind of one of the identified hazards of that spot. But the crosswalk exists whether it's painted on the street or not.
Okay. Questions of council to Director Grant of the report? Any questions regarding the information within the report? If Councillor Romero?
I just have one question. In this paragraph here, it says installing pedestrian beacons or converting the intersection to fully signalized or contradictory to engineering design guidelines. What do you mean by engineering design guidelines?
Sure. So there's been suggestions to put in like the rectangular flashers that pedestrians would push a button and get the right of way to cross the street. But they're not used at multi-way stops like a 3-way stop, for instance. What happens is if you give the right of way to pedestrians to stop traffic, the time delay that pedestrians take to cross and the lights take to stop flashing develops a queue in traffic, in which case you have congestion in an intersection and you develop an additional set of hazards. So they're not used in those situations. So instead what you do is use a fully signalized intersection, the same as over on Milton Road in Bristol. But that is typically triggered based on level of service of an intersection. So on an engineering side, level of service would look at how the traffic's flowing through the intersection, how long they're waiting in the queue, how long they're taking to get through, as opposed to pedestrians first and foremost. It's more directed towards motorist movement.
Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. I had that flagged as well. So one thing I noticed in this report, at the January meeting, it was asked for options with cost estimates. So I think that originally I thought, well, the beacon lights, if you hit them and then you can cross, that would make the most sense. But then in saying that, how that could create a traffic delay, I understand that point. So to me, I think, the consideration, if you're going to do anything on a large scale at that intersection, it would make more sense to do traffic lights, which I didn't anticipate coming into this conversation. So I think for the long term, it would be helpful to have those costs, because at the end of the day, the motion that was made in January did say that we would like to have options with cost estimates for each option. So the crosswalk beacons are still an option, although they don't sound like the best option, but we don't have any of those costs. What I also noticed in the report is that it's stated by our staff that they don't feel that an additional study should be supported. So in hearing that and hearing these things here, I don't think it makes sense to allocate funds to do that. Instead, I would like to see a report come back with those cost options so that we could consider those on a larger scale, because to Councillor Muse's point, there is a lot going on there, and we've hashed out the flags and some of the concerns over that. Now the crosswalk beacons, although it seems like they're helpful in many situations, they're single crosswalks, they're not three-way intersections. So I'm aware that there were lights there at one point. I don't know when they were removed, well before my time here, but I think we should be looking at some of this stuff for future use, because it's a busy intersection. We're a small town, but there's a lot going on there, and perhaps, long term, that's more of a fix. So I would like to see that information come forward. Thank you.
So, Councillor Charlton, you're suggesting that staff come back with costing for for stoplights, traffic lights at that intersection. Yes.
Yes, but in the motion that Councillor Guinea made in January were for options that what are options we could do, recognizing that sometimes the options that are presented aren't favorable by staff. So I guess what I'm noting is that there are no options with any cost. So how do we decide something about that intersection without seeing any of the cost implications?
If I could, staff referred to the 2015 report, because that 2015 report did examine all those things, because council at the time were also interested in traffic lights and all other things. I believe if we are going to direct staff to do further research regarding the cost of traffic lights and other things, that is going to require, we need to know a price tag of the price tag, whether or not staff have the ability to come up with that price tag of putting in traffic lights or other things by our next council meeting is highly doubtful in my view, considering how our timeframes work. And it is something that may well rest. It could be started. I'm very aware of our short time left until elections. And that item, I believe, in my opinion, should be left with the next council to look at whether or not they want to fund traffic lights at that intersection. I just, we all have been looking at our budget. We know the increase of staff we hope to have. We know the lengthy list of the capital projects, and I'm not sure if council wants to add another responsibility of looking at the cost and looking at more options, or funding a traffic study, because it's what would be required is a traffic study to look at all the other options. Staff did the best they could by looking at the options from our last, and they looked at the last study. And basically there is that second study. There is a second recommendation that, you know, if we want to fund another study, we can so do so. Councillor Gidney?
Thank you. I'm going to refer back to our previous, when we talked about the flags. And was suggested then that we use a flag for a period of time and see how that works. And I think that's a good thing at this point. We're getting late into the budget season. We don't have a lot of money to deal with right now. So I think under the circumstances, that's the flags, try them out, see what happens. And well, I mean, we're going to have information on that too. And then work from there. And if it's at the next council sessions that have to take care of it, then so be it. Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, from reading the report, it doesn't sound like any of the hazards have changed in the last 10 years, but it sounds like more a compliance issue with people not entering the crosswalks correctly, people not entering the roadway correctly. I think another way of looking at this is taking it through our police advisory board at their next meeting and consulting with the RCMP to see if they can step up enforcement at that intersection. And, you know, once you make an example of a few people and the word gets out that there's potential fines for jaywalking or for entering the intersection illegally while you're driving, word will get around and people will take the extra time and look what they're doing. You know, when we talk about the flags, one of the things that I had a concern about was when somebody said some people may not use the flags. If we condition drivers to look at flags in the intersection and somebody doesn't take a flag, then they're much less visible than they would have been before that happened. So we could be creating another hazard inadvertently, but I think increased enforcement could be one way to go with that.
I think increased enforcement at that intersection is a must. I know shop owners who have bird's eye view of that intersection, and it is alarming the number of rolling stops that vehicles make. And you're right, not just one day, but a whole many days of different hours, sporadic, and fines. Not warnings, but fines for rolling stops, for all of those things, because it might be the pedestrian once in a while who darts out, but it's often the vehicle driver. So good recommendation on the police advisory and asking for enforcement on that intersection. Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. Just wondering when the police advisory board meets again.
Shortly, I think we need to schedule one. We should have had one, I think, a week or two ago, and that didn't materialize. Apologize for that, but it would be very soon. Next couple of weeks, I think sorry, I should say very soon, but I think what we were talking about was the last 2 weeks of May.
Any other discussions on the report before I ask for the question on the report? I think we've all pretty well now understand everything in that and all of its suggestions. So all those in favor of the report, please signify by raising your hand. Unanimous. And is there any other matters dealing with 8.3? Any other matters with 8.3? Hearing none, we'll move on to 8.4. This is a response to a petition that was tabled on November 14th, 2023. And there are recommendations within the package. The first one deals with the report, which gives us the opportunities to ask questions about the report before we accept the report and receive it. If someone would so make that first motion. Councillor Gidney.
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receive the report titled November 14th, 2023, Petition Response for Information.
And that is seconded by Councillor Charlton. So, Director Grant, once again, 2 petitions were tabled. There were three requests. You've provided the actions for the 3 requests. Would you like to just quickly run through them, and then council can ask any questions further? Questions to Director Grant. So basically what we can respond to the petition is we can let the petitioners know that it is possible to reduce the speed from School East to Main, so Main Street East to School Street. We are going to continue to do the investigation that's needed for the application to reduce speed in that area. The other street they asked for does not meet criteria at all, so that's a no. The action 2, we are doing 3 speed feedback signs. So that is speed calming, which we can place there as well in other areas that we see. And the action 3, their request for an all-way stop, and staff are suggesting that if council decide to do that, that needs to be funded out of our accumulated surplus. It's not in this year's budget at this point in time, and that would require a $35,000 cost. So in summation, that's what Director Grant has said. So council, any other questions on the report before I call for question on the report? Councillor Gidney.
So the 4-way stop or all-way stop will cost $35,000 to have that investigated?
So before we would be ready to consider altering that to a 4-way stop, we need to do some more research and investigation, look at the movement of traffic, and have a real traffic professional come in and do an analysis on that existing intersection.
Councillor Charlton.
I'm having a hard time understanding, I guess, why we would have to spend like $35,000. Seems like a lot of money to turn something into an all-way stop. It was also my understanding, not long after we came into council, our former CAO had mentioned that that was being looked at to be turned into an all-way stop. So I don't know if it just kind of was a pipe dream and it never had any kind of detail ever looked at. Perhaps it didn't. But $35,000 just seems like a lot of money to spend. I guess if the intent is to slow people down, then it seems like that all-way stop would accomplish that, recognizing that we can slow the speed down, but if people actually have to come to a stop, they are slowing down. Like, people do clearly speed as they're going down in through 4 Points. So is it not my understanding that council could direct that intersection to be an all-way stop without allocating $35,000 to do so?
Through you, Mayor, that's where it gets ambiguous for me about the traffic authority. And just like our conversation about the flag program, now we're sort of on the other side of it. I'm not clear, but I don't think so. I think you can fund the work, but I don't think you can direct that to happen. And the reason, just to go back to the reason there's a study, is you bring in, basically what happens is you bring in consultants, they study that intersection, because like anything, it needs to be looked at impartially by experts, and you apply guidelines and all those sorts of things. And just going back to the liability. So if, for example, if we made a change that's not supported by evidence or those guidelines, and there is an issue, then you are taking, that's why we're doing that. Yeah.
Just further to your comment, I think it's important to note from our past report that in February, CBCL did do a traffic speed count, Main Street east of School Street, which is the Fort Point area, and 85% of people were traveling at 42 kilometers or less. So we need evidence, and that supports reducing the speed, because if everyone's driving slower, then you can reduce the speed. So we really don't have evidence of speeders in that area. The evidence shows people are already driving 42 kilometers an hour or less. Yeah, but you may continue now.
Thank you. My comment might have come off the wrong way. My apologies if it did. I guess my point is, maybe we could have some clarification about the 35,000, because it just, like, how long would this be studied? Because it does seem like it has a large price tag in comparison to the $1,000, for example, that we talked about earlier with that Main Street to Riverside, just looking at that aspect for the speeding separate issue. But would you mind just kind of explaining that, please?
Sure. For reference, the report that we talked earlier about in 2015 was probably about 40% of that price tag, just to look at pedestrian crossing. So this would be a lot more work, desktop analysis of vehicle movements, doing some counts and studies to see where people are going, why they're going, what is the behavior, not just at that intersection, but why is it that they're using that intersection, where they're trying to get to, so that you can then understand how you can improve it. So a four-way stop certainly doesn't cost $35,000. The infrastructure would cost a lot less than that. But does that improve that intersection at all? We don't know until we look at it and study it and really go in depth, addressing sight distance concerns and apron widths and stuff like that in the intersection.
Councillor Merrill.
I have to also say that we have to keep in mind, too, that we're purchasing 3 of those speed feedback signs, which is going to give us some data on traffic counts and speed, and I think we should wait and see what those reveal.
Any other questions of Director Grant on the report? So I will call for question on the motion that we've received the report titled November 14th, 2023 Petition Response for Information. All those in favor? Contrary? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak or make any recommendation dealing with petition response 8.4? Not at this time? Thank you. 8.5, draft 2024-2025 operating capital and 3-year water utility budget. So the budget is back before you again. CAO Jodry, would you go over the additions that have been made since our last budget? Because it does include now some changes in the capital plan. Oh, there's a recommendation to accept the report. Thank you, Councillor Muse. Councillor Muse, would you like to make that recommendation?
I move that the Council of the Region of Queens Municipality receives the report titled Proposed 2024 to 2025 Operating Capital Water Utility and Hillsview Acre Budget Detail for information.
Thank you, Councillor Muse. And that's seconded by Councillor Romero. CAO Jodry, if you would just update us on the most recent draft budget and how we're doing.
Yep. So as you see in the report, there were a number of changes that sort of got tracked. So the last section of the report outlines that the last set of changes were we increased the 1 cent for the fire truck funding. We tweaked the amount for the supporting fireworks in North Queens. So we upped that, and then balance the tax to zero via surplus. So that's just sort of the number that we also have to make sure it lands at exactly zero. So that number always changes according to what you're sort of adding or taking away. But so that's the operating, and in terms of the capital, I don't believe there was actually. Oh, well, just I guess the 10 million for the thank you. Yes. Just the Mount Pleasant service extension as a result of the announcement recently, and we also put the washrooms based on the conversation at last council about that. So those things are on the new capital budget.
Questions on the draft budget? Councillor Muse.
Okay, so on 8.5, first page, we have an operating budget shows a projected year-end surplus of $0 with the water utility projecting a deficit of $442,122. And then on 3 pages in, we have the proposed operating budget that we're going to reduce the water utility rate of 2.5%. Cents. I don't know if the way the rate is set up, that 2 cents has to go to the debt area rate, or could it be put on to the water utility itself?
So basically, Councillor Muse, your question is, because we've known for a while that we're going to, there was going to be a 0.5 cent decrease in the hydrant charge, correct? And that's a water utility, so there was going to be a 0.5 cent decrease in hydrant charge, and that's utility. And then we were going to also decrease the District 13 rate, their area rate, by 2 cents because they've got almost all their debt paid off from the former town of Liverpool. So your question is, rather than take 2.5 cents off the people who pay area rates in Liverpool, can we use that money to put in the budget somewhere? Is that what I understand?
Well, this is all to do with water utility. That's what I'm understanding. It comes charged for the water utility, and they're going to take 2 cents off. The 0.5 decrease in the hydrant rate, yeah, okay. But I'm still lost. The water utility is projecting a deficit of $442,000. So, isn't that a debt?
I think if you read it, it says residents subject to the hydrant charge for the water utility will see a half-cent decrease in that rate. So the water utility rate is going to decrease half a cent because of the hydrant charge. There's more people on the system, so the hydrant charge can be lesser. And the second sentence, residents in District 13 will see a 2-cent decrease for the debt area rate. That's not the water utility rate. That has nothing to do with water utility. That's the area rate for all the citizens in District 13. That's not a water utility debt. That's their basic area rate. And if you remember, the water utility is a total separate set of books than what residents are paying for area rates, because their area rates are paying for the past debt of the former town of Liverpool. They pay for streets, they pay for sidewalks, and they pay for hydrants. That's all over on our operational books. The water utility has a completely separate set of books. And they're going to see a half-cent decrease because of more people on the hydrant system, is how it was explained to us. So I'm not sure if we can take just 2 cents and dump it in the utility.
So I apologize. I don't have nearly as much background on this as I wish I did for obvious reasons today. But what I can tell you is that the water rates are set by the UARB. So in order for us to change the rates, we can't sort of take a discount here and apply it here. We would have to go to the UARB and ask for rate changes, which you're right, it is projecting a deficit of $442,122. There is a projected deficit from last fiscal of $403,000. So I can dig into this a bit more, but in order for us to increase the revenue, we'd still have to go to the UARB and ask for that.
You say you have to do that, but then we got here that the water utility is going down a 0.5 decrease in that rate. So why can we take it down there, but we can't take it? Anyway, the $442,000, if it's going to be a deficit, who's going to pay it? All the taxpayers in Queens County?
The only people responsible for the water utility are the water utility owners and the water people on the water utility. So that debt, I believe, is theirs. But my question is, and it's to what CAO Jodry, we're going to have a $400 and some thousand debt on the water utility that we've just finished the year of. We're going to have another $400 and some thousand projected in the hole on this year. And in my former years on council, I always believed that the water utility was not supposed to be running deficits. So we've known that we've had great expenses with the water utility, especially last year. We were compensated with insurance for some, but there was much to do, and we're going to continue having water utility debts. And even though this council, we were part of a water rate study, I believe, in our first year. And we hired a consulting firm that specialized in water rates, paid them a considerable amount of money. They did their rate study. We asked for a rate, and that rate did not cover everything. We asked for it, I believe, a little prematurely. There were expenses that were water utility expenses that were being billed to general public works. So unfortunately, after that first rate study review was graded, and then we realized the true cost of running the water utility, which is why we've been told by our finance director that there needs to be a water rate utility study done so that this deficit doesn't occur. But at this point in time, it is showing almost a $400,000 plus deficit for this year.
And to answer your question, Councillor Muse, that you asked before, I believe the water utility has to pay interest on the debt. Now, exactly how that debt is financed, I'm not clear about, but it does pay interest on that debt. So it is the users who ultimately will have to pay for it.
So maybe Director Grant can answer this question. I understand our Director of Finance isn't here, but I believe that I thought there was already, like the UARB study is potentially already triggered or in action to some extent because we had a deficit last year. I thought that was, or like, is that in motion at all?
So the rates like you see in here, the half-cent for the hydrant is a calculated rate based on UARB formula, and this was set out 3 years ago. So we're entering the last year that we're projecting a deficit. That would trigger another rate study. So we got to go back, do the whole thing again, go back to UARB, come out with another 3 years of rates. At that point, if we're not in a deficit position, it's reasonable to expect that we just maintain our rates and we would continue on like was done for years previous. Does that help?
Yes, I guess maybe some clarification. I don't feel it's probably fair to ask you this, but maybe to our CAO. So to Councillor Muse's point, it's talking about a half-cent decrease for the hydrant charges. So anybody that's on water utility would pay those hydrant charges, right? So I think what he's saying is, can we just leave that the way that it is and allocate those funds? And you're saying we can't. Because to the other point about District 13, that's debt for the roads and things like you had mentioned. So it's unfair not to extend that to places like Brooklyn and other Milton, certain areas who have water because they're not District 13. So I don't know if any of those points can be clarified without a Director of Finance, but
If I may, the best I can offer council is to try to get a lot more information for Monday's council meeting. Yeah, that's the best I can offer at this time.
But those rates were all set as Councillor Grant by the UARB, and that was the hydrant rate that they said we could do this year. So we have to follow that UARB. The other 2 cent was just, we freed up some debt. District 13, their debt's freed up. There was considerable debt from the former town of Liverpool, and that debt's just getting lower and lower. Director Grant, can you add anything else to that?
No, I think that answers it all. The hydrant charge, its foundation isn't just for users of the utility. It's for anybody that's within a certain proximity, I don't know off the top of my head, to a hydrant. So just because they are or not, and there's definitely people, folks in the county that are tax rated on the hydrant charge side of it. But those rates are set out, and we're not at liberty to just flex them when we feel like to try and create revenue where it doesn't exist. We have to go back to the UARB and ask for variance to do that, which we're proposing in this budget.
Any other discussion on that item before I ask for questions on any other questions arising from the draft budget? Any other discussion about any other matters? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, it was brought to my attention last week, and I apologize for leaving it so late, but we didn't increase our limits for low-income thresholds. We know there's been a lot of inflation this year, and the consumer price index went up 3.4%. We end up with bracket creep. I know some people are getting small raises in their pension, small raises in the EI rate, minimum wage, that could price them out of that benefit. So we could be clawing back basically what little benefit they gained out of inflation. I don't think this is something that would increase the amount of our budget, because I think it would readjust our brackets to where they would be, so that we would still be forgiving the same amount of taxes that we would last year, but we're not having people that are just on the boundary line lose that benefit. And I would like to see our brackets creep up by the same amount as the consumer price index to keep pace with that, so people don't get priced out of the market, out of their homes.
CAO Jodry did do some investigation on that, but you're suggesting that there would be a policy that, because as you know, we have 3 levels, 3 income levels. So you're saying you'd like to see a policy, or just for this year that it's an increase based upon.
I think it should be put in a policy that our amounts keep pace with inflation. We do the same thing for our salaries, with, wages in our organization to some extent. But I think this year, where we don't have the time to do a policy, I'm asking that we increase the brackets by the same amount as the consumer price index from last year in this budget. I don't think it will affect the amount that we're paying out or the amount that we're forgiving. I don't think it will materially affect the budget. I think if we don't do it, we'll have less people being able to claim it. So it will trigger potentially a surplus.
CEO Jodry?
I mean, this decision is solely within the realm of council. If that's what you want to do, we can certainly do that. I'm not sure what else to add to the conversation.
Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. If I remember correctly, I think our finance staff had brought forward, like they flagged an issue that there seemed to be a gap based off applications that they had been processing before, that identified that there were many applications that were just outside of the cutoff. And I was of the understanding that we did increase that quite a lot to accommodate for that. So, excuse me, sorry. I'm wondering if that's been flagged. I'm assuming it hasn't, or perhaps we would have already had that discussion. And then what was the amount that was budgeted for this last year? And did we exceed it? Because I don't recall seeing a line item for that.
Yeah, no, that is in the budget. It did go up by about 10,000, if I remember correctly. And so I did talk to some of the finance staff about this yesterday. And really, we never know, like we can budget a certain amount, but if the policy is people who fit this criteria are eligible, then, sort of whoever applies, and you never really know exactly how many, we can guess. But so with what Councillor Brown is speaking about, I did talk to some of our finance staff about it and estimated. So if we moved it by that amount, what kind of budget impact might that have? And the recommendation to me from staff was, if you increased that budget line by 10, 15, 20,000, that would probably cover it. But again, until people, do we actually know who applies? It's difficult to know exactly.
Councillor Charlton?
So it was referenced about potentially increasing it in the budget line from 10 to 20, but what are we discussing? Like, it's an income threshold, so what are we taking it from and potentially putting it at? Because I can't recall what I know there's 3 thresholds, but without having that reference in front of me, I don't recall what those total income amounts are.
Why don't we take a short break and we'll get that information. So I'm just going to call a 10-minute recess and we'll find that information. And we are recessed for 10 minutes.
Just move.
And we're back. So all of council have the application for exemption, which clearly has the numbers on the bottom. As you can recall, last year we generously bumped these up quite a bit, and we pumped up the top one, made 3 our finance manager did this. And CAO Joji, would you speak about the minimal effect the 3% has?
Okay, so just for clarity, 2 things I want to just provide council. So in council's budget, under section 9 of the budget, there's a section called taxation. In that, there's a row called tax exemption. You'll see that last fiscal year, we spent $117,000 on those rebates. We spent 125, which is why we made the budget 125,000 for this year's budget. So just for clarity there. So what I was saying about the 10,000, you could add, if you want to make some adjustments to this within the realm of what was being discussed, you could add 5 or 10,000 to that budget line to probably cover this. And that's probably a lot. In terms of looking the amounts, if you're talking about changing the bracket itself by, for example, 3%, so the bottom bracket would go from what it is now, which is 0 to 20,000. It would go to 0 to $20,600 is what the change would be if you were doing 3%. And if you were, and then, on the top part of the bracket, so the 25,000 to 30,000, that would go to 30,900, just to give you a sense. And if you're talking about increasing the exemption amount you're giving, not the bracket, but the exemption amount. So if you were increasing the $300 by 3%, it would be $309 is what the rebate would be. So just so council has some sense about the numbers you may be talking about.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, and to clarify, what I was asking for was to have the income brackets increased by the consumer price index from 2023 by 3.4%, which on the top would take that to $31,020, and the bottom one would be $20,680. So it's not a huge amount, but it keeps people from being crept out of the benefit.
In talking with staff, the majority of applicants all fall within that middle bracket income. I believe Canada pension and other things all fit within there. It'd be interesting to know, because this is single household income, income with the unemployment rate being risen some, they would still fall, I believe, within under the $30,000 minimum wage. If you're a minimum wage earner, you would still fall within, fall less than 30,000 on minimum wage.
I think if you're talking minimum wage, the minimum, if you figure it out, it's like 35,000 for the year. If you make $17 an hour or whatever, right? Times 2,000 hours per year.
Councillor Gidney?
I'm sorry, with the calculation of 35 hours a week, $17 an hour is $30,940.
And that's only a 35-hour week.
Yes,
So if you're working a 40-hour week,
yes, okay.
it would be 35,000. So I don't know what council wishes to do with this, because we already have a policy. It would simply be amending the policy. How much more to add in? Last year, the projection is at the end of fiscal that we'll have spent $117,000. That's a pretty good number. Staff increased it by 8,000 to put it up to 125 in case we get more applicants. But again, it's up to council if they wish to increase those numbers, and that would have to come from accumulated surplus or such an area, because I know this council's not looking at increasing tax rates, so it would have to come off of the accumulated surplus or one of those. It's not a reserve line, so it would have to come from accumulated surpluses. And one thing that I am knowledgeable of that we do not have is the total cost of our debt and our payments and things like that. But if council so wishes to do this, Councillor Gidney?
I'll just stick with the status quo. I think we've got enough going on this year without adding more to staff to try to get things figured out. And it's something that we can look at a later date, at a later time to make some calculations for future years. Thank you.
Comments from other councillors? Councillor Muse?
I say status quo too, but I think it's something that we should look at in the policy to put in that every year that it goes up the cost of living allowance.
Other comments? Councillor Brown, you wish to speak again?
Yeah, with Councillor Gidney's calculation that somebody that worked 35 hours a week would just be priced out of the $30,000 range this year. So somebody who got a very minimal increase in their minimum wage who works 35 hours a week just lost $350 of that raise, that small raise that they got each year, by being bracket creep, just taking them out over. And we're talking about the lowest and the poorest in our society who need the most help from us, and it's a small amount of money to really be able to help those who need it the most. I really feel that it's something that we should do.
Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Brown. I would like to see the increments go up. I think the top bracket should go up to, maybe it's 34,999 or 35, whatever logistically staff think. But for context, I was trying to look up some other property tax exemptions, and I thought at first that the province gave low-income property tax exemptions, but they're for seniors. They're not for all demographics. So I did find MODL on April 9th, council revised their property tax rebate program significantly. So homeowners with household incomes under $51,000 are eligible to receive a rebate of up to $650. I recognize we can't compare ourselves to Modal financially. However, this represents a 14% increase over what they provided last year for 2023. So I think upping that to the $35,000 is more than reasonable, and it helps those who need it most. So I have no problem with that.
Other comments? Councillor Romero?
Yes, I believe 30,000 is right on the borderline. I've been doing some figuring here as well, and I think even 31, even to raise it like the 3% to bring it 31,020 is still kind of just on the borderline if some people do work 40 hours a week. So I have no problem with 35. At least it would cover a lot of our low income. Thank you.
Other comments? So I hear 2 for 35. Councillor Hawks just put his hand up. 3 for 35. 4. Anyone else? And I've heard 2 against. Councillor Muse, you just put your hand up. Did you wish to speak to 35? And then we adjust. So I guess the question that staff are going to need to know, does 25 move to 35, or do we go at 25 and then go down in 3 increments like they have. So it's because as you'll notice, if you're 25,000 to 30,000, you can get up to $300 if your income's between that, and then it's 20 to 25 and 0 to 20. So my question is, if we're putting the top one up to 35, does the bottom one then go total income 0 to 25,000, $25,000 $1 to 30,000 $1, or 30,000 and then 30,000 $1 to 35,000 to 35,000? Is that we put each one up $5,000 rather than just the top one, because otherwise we're putting the biggest one up the highest. So the top one, and I'm uncertain how staff are going to determine the amount that will be, because that may well be more than $10,000 in exemptions.
We would just add $10,000 to that budget line item, and if it goes over, then we bring that back to council.
So we have a majority in agreement with changing that in the budget, and then we'll have to have the policy at our next council meeting as well to amend the policy. Or do you want to just put the number in the budget and then amend the policy at a future council meeting? Councillor Muse?
I don't see why you just don't put the last one 25,000 to 35,000. I don't see why you got to change all the other ones.
When we debated and based this policy, it was based upon fairness and division of the money. So if we allow the people who are currently at the top range, if we give them even more money, but the people who are at the bottom, you'll notice the lowest in our tax exemption get the biggest rebate. They get $400 rebate. The people at the top making $30,000 or less get $300 rebate. It's really unfair to give the $35,000 people, put that up to $35,000, and yet leave the people at the very lowest at 20 at only 400, because they all should crouch up. That was the whole premise of the division, and that's how our finance manager explained it to us. So, I mean, I'm happy doing what everyone gets, that $5,000 bump, and it just puts them. Councillor Charlton?
I think from us dealing with this before, we committed to this in our budget process, and then staff just brought forward an amendment at a future council date that rectified that. So I have no problem with that.
So $10,000 extra in the line tax exemption, and that will be funded from where? I don't think this is accumulated surplus, which will soon be zero. But you shouldn't have surpluses anyway, so we may as well spend it. Okay, so that will come from accumulated surplus. So we'll have to make those adjustments on the budget. I think this consensus around the room is enough for us to. We didn't make motions on the other ones that when we had our budget discussions.
If I may, just for my own clarity, because I'm going to bring this back, I understand I'll add 10,000 to the budget, no problem. I'm not clear about consensus around the council table around, are we moving each bracket by $5,000 or whether it's just the top one? And I'm honestly not clear on whether you're raising the amount you're giving.
These exemptions aren't going to be available until February 28th, 2025. No exemption provided unless the request is made prior to, well, no, this is last year's stuff. So this doesn't come into effect right away, so it would give us time to process those, I believe.
My
Or have
understanding.
we had ones coming in already? They're coming in now.
Yeah, so
So we will need, but we can't issue checks until we've changed that policy, which we'll have to have.
right.
So is it 20, how many want to see what I suggested and it go from 20 to 25 and then 2501 and 3, 4, 5, 6, okay.
Okay, understood.
So go in $5,000 increments.
And the amount? Staying the same?
Yeah, 400, 350, 300.
Perfect.
Yeah. So anyone applying, yeah, okay, so they'll process them later. Other changes to the budget. Councillor Muse.
It's not really a change. I think we should have a policy. I look back at donations that, I guess you call them donations, that council give out. And some days we want to give money away and then other days we don't. For instance, Council Hawks brought up about $7,000, and it's got withdrawn. But we have Greenfield getting $5,000 and they don't have to show any paperwork. We have the Queen's Transit every year come back and ask for more money. And, and the books don't really show that they need it, but they are getting it. And I haven't got a problem with that. But I just think that we don't have a consistent policy of how to give out money. And I think that we should have one.
We have a CIF fund, and what we tend to do with the monies you just mentioned are groups that don't fit in that CIF funding. Either they have too much money, or they don't have enough money, or they're not a nonprofit, or they're many, many things. And so that's just offhand wills of council. We have a policy for giving out grants, and it's a community investment fund, and we try to channel everyone through there. But what we sometimes do is sometimes we get anonymous monies, and then we'll sort of, we've given anonymous large amounts before. So I understand when you say we need a policy for giving out money, but we have a policy. It's just that when people ask for money and it doesn't fit in the policy, then council makes a motion and grants the money. So I'm not sure how we can make a policy for giving out money when we have a very good policy on how grants should be given out.
Okay, in discussion with the CAO, I called him before. I didn't want to throw this at him at the last minute. And he's saying that, we look back at all the money that we give out, and it's a substantial amount of money being given out every year. And as the taxpayers, I think they should know how much money is being given out. And if we had a policy to say, that we're allowed to do this, like after Council Hawks brought up at the last meeting about the $7,000, I got a call from a place and they want to know if we can give them like $5,000 because they don't have any money to run a hall. And I'm not saying it's wrong that we should, but I think we should have a policy. The CIF, the Community Investment Fund, is the good thing. But they got to go through certain areas to get that money. If like a hall or the ball field wanted the money, we should have a policy for that type thing so that we can give them money and not turn them down every time. Or if we feel like it the next time, we give them money. That's what I mean.
I wouldn't want to make that policy because it would be a tough one to make. Council has the ability to do what it so chooses within the MGA Act. And there are times, and you're right, groups ask us for money because they have too much money and they can't get CI, or they have no money, or they've already applied for money and they can't get more money. As you're aware, we are searching for a clerk, and that is a very good question for when we have a clerk. Is there such a way to develop a policy that kind of guides council to how you have to give out money? But council can always overrun a policy anyway. So even if we had a policy and it said, if you don't fit the CIF, then you have to be all these things. You know, if someone still didn't fit in that one, council still could give nonprofit organizations money. Councillor Charlton?
I think we as council have to understand the request, and it's not just about giving out money. If a group just says, hey, can we have these funds, I think it's unreasonable for us to consider that request without a presentation and trying to understand why they need the money, how it would benefit the community. There are many people who access the community investment fund, whether it might be for the operating part for a hall, and maybe this group has surpassed the deadline and they'll have to look at it next year. But there are lots of different circumstances, and to Mayor Norton's point, we could go against the policy even if we have one. But the one that sticks out to me the most in our past 4 years here at council is Queen's Daycare. So they came forward and asked for a $30,000 operating grant, and they had planned to come back the next year and ask for that same request because it wasn't guaranteed. We did support them the first year with the $30,000. We all know that that's a provincial responsibility for childcare. That daycare was in critical shape and risked closing. And members around this table supported that request. That $30,000 kept them out of the hole. They succeeded, and they didn't come back and ask us the next year. Now you look at that building, it's thriving. It has a huge expansion. It's been taken over by the YMCA. So we didn't hand out that money without facts and presentations and things like that. So I think that those are the things we have to remember. And if a group is asking for help and there's a good reason why, then encourage them to do a presentation, bring it forward, and so we can see how we can help them. Because that community investment fund is great for a lot of reasons, but there's certain things outside of that that it didn't hit on. And with the Queen's Daycare, they didn't fall under that criteria for that. But the region of Queens supporting them saved that building, which had a huge benefit to the community, young families, economically. So I think we just have to remember when an ask comes forward to look at what it is and how we can help them. I don't think a policy is really going to solve that.
That was very well spoken, Councillor Charlton. Thank you for that. And I think that is truly what council does. We will recall, we just had a recent request from Queens County Food Bank for funds. They didn't show a need for funds, but we made it very clear that if they ever found themselves in a position where they needed money, to come to us. And other groups have done that as well. And I don't think we would deny any group that, as Councillor Charlton said, expressed a need, demonstrated a community need for us. We do give out a significant amount of money in support of community organizations, Councillor Muse, I will agree. When one looks at the amount of associations we put on our assessment exemption or assessment list, that we basically pay all their taxes and they don't get tax bills. That's huge. And we did recommend as council that there be a clear change to how that's done, that all those groups have to supply us with current Nova Scotia joint stock standing. There was questions that we're providing tax exemption to groups that are no longer current with joint stocks, which is sort of a no-no for us. So I think it would be maybe perhaps when we do the budget, I usually try to note how much money we do give to community groups, because it's something that the region of Queens and has always done, is do its best to support community groups. So we do give a significant amount of money to our non-for-profits, but to Councillor Charlton's point, we support groups who do not fit under community investment funds when they come and clearly express a need. So, is there any other discussion, Councillor Gidney?
Just one quick comment. I think maybe, and we are very generous in that, but there should be limits. That we should have a ceiling that we can give this much this year. Like with the community investment fund, there's a limit, and once the money's gone, it's gone. And I think if we're giving out any money for anything, we should have limits. And I think that would solve some problems. Thank you.
I don't think there's any law that can restrict council on monies they give out if they fit within the Municipal Government Act. Because even if it's a policy, council has the right to override their policies. So you can set a limit, but council's an independent body and it makes decisions. So it's, you can set a limit. You can say we're only giving out $100,000 in extra outside the CIF. And then we get an anonymous donation for $350,000 to go toward some great outdoor facility. And we can't give it. We can't give it to them, even though someone's no money's been donated in or whatever. So I don't know. Let's have that discussion. Let's just think about this all for another day, and let's get back to the task of the budget. Any other questions on the budget? Any other questions? Councillor Muse.
This is for Director Grant. In the 5-year plan, capital plan, unless I'm missing it, I don't see the Roy Turner extension. I definitely don't see it on this year, and I thought that was one of the main things that we have to have before we can do the rest.
So if you look at page 1, 24-25, about halfway down, you'll see MPSE-water transmission extension. That is the last phase of the water transmission main on Roy Turner Road.
It's listed as $535,000, and for the water transmission extension, which we always used to call Roy Turner extension, and then a lift station upgrading at $2,101,000. We do have whistling in the background, but we're going to continue. Councillor Muse, does that answer that question? It's in the capital. It's in your capital investment plan. It's got the green stripe on the top. Halfway down, MPSE. While he's looking at that, are there any other questions? Councillor Muse, do you have other questions? Any other questions respecting anything within this budget? No? So we're good on this? So, okay, so we'll expect to see those changes. Item 8.6 is a request for an addition of the bench. Yeah, we're just going to see if I can get a new mic here.
I did.
Okay. Thanks, viewing audience, for that interruption. Technology's great when it works. We did not we made the motion for the budget report, but we didn't accept it. So we had moved and seconded. So all in favor of the budget draft going forward, signify by saying aye. Good. And for our last item, Deputy Mayor Fancy is declaring a conflict on this matter. CEO Jodry was contacted on the weekend. Their family wishes permission to place a memorial bench and to plant a tree in remembrance of his son and grandson at the North Queens Aquatic Center. And so that's the request they've asked for. So I'm just wondering, councils, it's a discussion. Just a few reminders that we had asked for a policy for this. We do not yet have a policy, and consultation with our head gardener, Scott Ormwood, regarding things. But anyway, Councillor Hawks?
Yeah, I got no problem with her doing that. It's just that it has to follow under our proposed policy when we do get one, because I think it's going to take some time to do that. So if everybody else is okay with it, I'm good with it, right?
So you're suggesting that we contact the applicant and tell her that when we have a policy developed, we'll be back in touch, knowing that we've waited some time for that policy. So we'll have to be very honest with her and tell her within a year. Councillor Charlton?
I think that given that we don't have a policy, it's not even something we have in draft form, we should just deal with these requests as they come forward until we have such policy. I don't recall in the time frame that we've been here any requests for North Queens coming forward. So as long as it meets, I understand it would have to go through our staff and they would have to choose what made sense and where it would go. So I can't see any issues with that without hearing anything from our staff. So I think we should just deal with these right now as they come through. If we get like an exorbitant amount of them, then maybe that's a little bit different. But I think it's unfair to say we're looking for a policy when we said that a year ago, respectfully.
And we did approve one that had been waiting for a year and a half, and we finally approved that one. So the rest of council's opinion, understanding that this would be it would come forward as a recommendation at our next meeting, and generally, if I recall, the recommendation is it's generally a granite bench, because as the region we become the owners of it. So we've always recommended granite benches, and they're installed at the cost of the applicant. They're sited upon consultation with staff on the property, and respecting a tree, again, it would be staff who would decide what type of tree will grow best out there and that type of stuff. Is there anyone who's opposed to seeing this come forward at our next meeting as a recommendation? Someone want to just make a motion that this come forward at our next meeting as a recommendation? Just, we can make reference to Jay Martin's request for a memorial bench and a tree to come forward as a recommendation. Councillor Hawks?
I can move that we... Huh? Okay, I can move that we move this forward to next meeting as a recommendation that to the applicant that we can do this for them, and yeah.
CEO Jodry, you know what that's going to look like as a recommendation?
Yep.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Brown. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Contrary? Unanimous. And on that note, I need a motion to move in camera. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Gidney. All in favor? Jack, we're making a motion to move in camera. Yep. All in favor? Unanimous.